They think I am just the boring, pragmatic daughter. The emotionless bank machine. The one who shows up, writes checks, and disappears back into her spreadsheets without complaint. They forget that I am Rylee, a 33-year-old forensic accountant who dismantles sophisticated financial fraud schemes. They forget I can smell a bad balance sheet from a mile away. At the party I funded, my sister got a $450,000 historic home. I got a crusted blender. I stood quietly. Then Dad said, "You have money. Your sister needs security." I shut it all down. The scent of French catering and fresh, cut flowers belied the poison about to be served. I had spent $3,000 of my own money to throw this anniversary party for Marcella and Royce Kingsley, my parents. I had booked the historic inn, arranged the jazz quartet, and sent the invitations. My real, unopened gift. A $5,000 check toward a European river cruise sat on the gift table, buried under well-meaning casserole dishes and wine bottles. I was standing in the middle of the living room, holding a cardboard box taped together so haphazardly that one corner was splitting open. Inside was a blender, the exact same blender I gave my mother 4 years ago. It was filthy. The power cord was crusted with dried coffee stains. The plastic pitcher was cloudy and scratched. Someone had stuffed a Starbucks gift card inside, and when I pulled it out to check, the balance mocked me $15. 10 feet away, my 29-year-old sister, Fallon, was literally screaming with joy. It was that high-pitched squeal that made the dogs bark 3 blocks away. She was jumping up and down in her expensive athleisure outfit, waving a document above her head like she had just won the lottery. That document was a quitclaim deed to the historic carriage house. The one made of original red brick, located in the most expensive historic district in our city. The one our grandparents left to the family trust, free and clear, no mortgage, completely paid off. The one currently valued at $450,000. And my parents had just signed it over to her. Just now. In front of 50 guests at their 35th wedding anniversary party. The party I paid for. I am going to turn it into my yoga sanctuary. Fallon shrieked, clutching the deed to her chest. A healing space! Can you imagine? I will have crystal grids in every corner. My mother, Marcella, turned to me with that smile. The smile that looked warm and maternal to everyone else, but felt like a knife sliding between my ribs when it was directed at me. She wore the $2,000 pearl necklace I had given her last Christmas. Rylee, sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as affection. You are so practical. You do not need these artistic, soulful things. That blender still works fine. I tested it just last week. I stared at the crusted power cord in my hands. She had not even cleaned it. My father, Royce, adjusted the silk Hermes tie I had given him for Father's Day, and nodded sagely, as if he were a sage dispensing wisdom. You make plenty of money, Rylee. You can buy whatever you want. Your sister is sensitive. She needs asset security. Stability. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that they had just performed a public, calculated act of blatant financial and emotional favoritism. It was the climax of a 33-year-long pattern. They gave the jobless, flighty daughter an asset worth $450,000 and gave the responsible, successful daughter her own used garbage. I set the dirty blender down on the gift table with exaggerated care. I looked at the $5,000 check for the cruise, still sitting under the wine bottles. I looked at Fallon, still clutching her deed, still crying her pretty tears. Something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for decades, finally snapped. It did not break. It became cold, objective, and lethal. I pulled out my phone, calculating the cost of this betrayal with brutal speed. I called the catering company. "Hey, this is Rylee Kingsley. I need to cancel the payment authorization for tonight's event." "Yes. I know the party is happening right now. I am revoking my credit card authorization immediately." Mom's face went white. "Rylee, what are you?" I held up one finger. "Wait," and continued with the venue coordinator. "Same thing. I am canceling my payment. The party hosts will need to settle the bill themselves. Thank you." The jazz quartet stopped playing mid-song. The room went silent. I picked up the dirty blender, held it up so everyone could see the grimy pitcher and the crusted cord, and looked directly at my father. I enunciated each word with crystalline clarity. "I think you two will need this to pulverize your hopes of me funding your retirement." I set the blender back down. Sterling, my fiancé, was already there, grabbing my coat without a word. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind the stunned silence, the cancelled party, and the chaos that was about to erupt. I did not look back. I was done being their bank machine. 18 months of blessed silence bought me time, but the habit of due diligence refused to die. When Sterling and I pulled out of the historic inn parking lot that night, the noise of my parents' crumbling party was the soundtrack to my immediate, absolute freedom. I had finally severed the cord. The physical one, like the grimy blender cord, and the emotional one, the thick line of obligation. Those 18 months were the best of my life. I flourished professionally, making senior director at my firm 6 months ago, leading the most complex fraud investigations in the region. My income increased by 40%. I thrived on the sheer, clean logic of numbers. There was no ambiguity in a corrupted ledger, no favoritism in a tax filing. Sterling and I bought a 2,000 square foot penthouse downtown. Floor to ceiling windows, clean lines, comfortable modern design. We chose every piece of furniture together. No hand-me-downs, no guilt-laden family heirlooms. Just space that belonged entirely to us. Sterling was the steady presence in my life, the one who didn't need me to fix him or fund him. He just needed me. But the brain of a forensic accountant is trained to spot patterns, and once trained, you cannot turn it off. It becomes reflex, like breathing. One rainy Saturday morning, Sterling was asleep, and I was on the couch drinking coffee. I found myself on the county property database, pulling up the address of the carriage house. It was just professional habit. Just wondering what Fallon had actually done with the $450,000 gift. The answer, based on her occasionally checked Instagram feed, was nothing productive. She had posted exactly 3 carefully staged photos of yoga poses in empty rooms right after the party, captioned with nonsense about finding her inner goddess. Then, the posts stopped. Instead, the carriage house became a venue. Her feed filled up with blurry photos of late-night parties, string lights haphazardly hung across the original timber beams. Someone doing a keg stand in the historic kitchen. videos of dancing on the porch at 2 in the morning, disturbing every neighbor on that quiet, expensive street. It was a beautiful, historic liability, being treated like a fraternity house. But the superficial neglect was only cosmetic. The real discovery, the financial ticking time bomb, came from the city database. I had forgotten that owning property in a historic district comes with strict, legally enforced requirements. You are not just a homeowner. You are a custodian of architectural history. There are rules about exterior maintenance, paint colors, and landscaping. And violations come with serious penalties. I pulled up the property record for the carriage house address and felt my pulse quicken. Line after line of violation notices loaded on my screen. Violation number 847, HG. Failure to maintain landscaping to code standards. Front lawn grass exceeds 8 inches in height. Fine, $500 per day until corrected. Violation number 1120, 3, HG. Exterior wooden window frames showing visible rot and peeling paint. Failure to restore using historically approved paint colors. Fine, $500 per day until corrected. Violation number 1590, 4, HG. Removal of original storm shutters without proper permits. Fine, $1,000 per day until restored. I sat back in my chair, coffee forgotten, and started the calculation. The first violation was dated 8 months ago. The window frame violation was 6 months old. The shutter issue was 4 months old. $500 per day for 240 days. $500 per day for 180 days. $1,000 per day for 120 days. The numbers danced in my head like music. $120,000 in grass violations. $90,000 in window frame violations. $120,000 in shutter violations. Plus $18,000 in unpaid property taxes. Because, of course, Fallon hadn't paid those either. With accruing interest and administrative fees. The total debt was roughly $350,000 in municipal liens on a property worth $450,000. I pulled up the violation notices themselves. They had all been mailed to the carriage house address by certified letter. According to the tracking, they were delivered but never signed for. Fallon didn't know, or, more likely, she had seen the official looking envelopes and ignored them, the way she ignored anything that required adult responsibility. The city had already placed a priority lien on the property 4 weeks ago. That lien sits above all other claims. The city wants its money. And here is what my parents and Fallon didn't understand about the world: debt doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It grows. It compounds. It becomes something alive and hungry. I spent the next 2 weeks researching municipal lien purchases. When someone fails to pay city fines or taxes, the municipality can sell that debt to private investors to recover the money immediately. Once a private investor owns the lien, they have extraordinary power, including the right to foreclose. I formed the LLC on a Tuesday, Mars LLC, standing for Municipal Asset Recovery Services. It was registered in Delaware for privacy, with a local agent address that couldn't be traced back to me. It sounded boring, bureaucratic, and completely official. On a Monday, I called the city's revenue department, all business, no emotion. 3 days later, after paperwork and a wire transfer of $348,000, $750, every penny of accumulated fines, penalties, interest, and unpaid taxes. I owned the debt. All of it. The carriage house my sister had been given. The asset that was supposed to provide her with security was now effectively mine. She just didn't know it yet. I showed Sterling the documentation over dinner that night. He studied the papers, his lawyer brain processing the implications, and then looked up at me with something like awe. "You bought your sister's debt," he stated. "I bought the city's debt," I corrected. "My sister just happens to be the one who owes it." Sterling laughed then, shaking his head. "They really have no idea what they did, do they? Giving a $500,000 asset to someone who can't even remember to pay property taxes." "No," I agreed, refilling my wine glass. "They have no idea." But I wasn't ready to make my move yet. This wasn't about revenge in the impulsive sense. This was about strategic consequence. I had built the trap. I just needed to wait for them to walk back into it. Because I knew with the certainty that comes from 33 years of being underestimated, that eventually, they would need me again. They always need me again. And when they came calling, I would be ready. Not with a checkbook this time. With consequences. The phone call that broke the silence came on a Wednesday evening next week, confirming they needed their ATM again. Sterling and I were cooking dinner together. He was handling the pasta while I prepped a salad when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Aunt Ramona. Aunt Ramona, the perfect, safe intermediary. She is my father's younger sister. And the only person in my extended family who has ever acknowledged that the way my parents treat me is fundamentally wrong. I answered on speaker. "Hey, Aunt Ramona, Rylee honey." Her voice was tight with stress. "I am at City Hospital. Your father is in the emergency room." My hand froze over the cutting board. Sterling looked up sharply. "What happened?" "Your mother says it is a heart attack. They brought him in about 40 minutes ago. She is not handling it well. She asked me to call you." Of course she did. Mom would never call me directly. That would require admitting she needs me. "Is he stable?" I asked. My forensic accountant brain automatically organized the situation into facts and data points. "The doctors are running tests now. Rylee, I think you should come. Whatever has happened between you and your parents. If something happens to your father, I will be there in 20 minutes. I said, and ended the call. Sterling had already turned off the stove. "I am driving. You do not have to, Rylee." He took my face in his hands, his gray eyes serious. "I am driving. You are shaking." I looked down at my hands and realized he was right. They were trembling, not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something triggered by the memory of a past crisis. The drive to the hospital should have been 17 minutes. Sterling made it in 14. Navigating evening traffic with the kind of calm competence that reminded me why I was marrying him. "You know what I am thinking about?" I said suddenly, staring out the window at the city lights blurring past. Sterling reached over and took my hand. "Tell me." 3 years ago, August 14th, 2:30 in the morning. My voice sounded flat. Detached, like I was reading a case file. I had acute appendicitis. The pain was so intense I could not stand up straight. I was on the floor of my bathroom, trying not to throw up, and I called Mom. Sterling's hand tightened on mine. I told her I thought my appendix was rupturing. I said I needed help getting to the emergency room. Do you know what she said? Rylee. She said she could not leave the house. She said Fallon had just broken up with her boyfriend, some guy she had been dating for 3 weeks. And Fallon was threatening to cut off all her hair. Mom said she could not take her eyes off her for even a minute, because Fallon was having a crisis. The words were coming faster now. A dam breaking after years of pressure. She told me to call an Uber. She said I was capable and strong and I would figure it out. So I did. I called an Uber, and some guy named Marcus drove me to the emergency room, while I held a trash bag in my lap in case I threw up. I admitted myself. I signed my own surgical consent forms while the surgeon told me my appendix was close to rupturing. I went into surgery alone. I woke up in recovery alone. Sterling pulled over right there on the side of the road, hazards on, and turned to face me. The next morning, I continued, staring straight ahead. I was lying in my hospital room, with an IV in my arm, and I checked Instagram. Because I am an idiot and I could not help myself. And there was a photo Mom had posted at 3 a.m. the night before. Her and Fallon, eating pizza in their pajamas, watching a movie. The caption said, "Heartbreak healing sleepover," with a bunch of heart emojis. Unbelievable. Sterling breathed. She posted a picture of eating pizza with my sister, while I was in surgery. Sterling pulled me into his arms then, as much as the car's center console would allow, and I let him hold me, even though I was not crying. I was past crying. That required having some grief left, some hope that things could be different. I had none. "That is why I am shaking," I said into his shoulder. "Not because I am afraid Dad is dying. I am fairly certain this is stress, a panic attack brought on by the foreclosure notice. I am shaking because 3 years ago, I nearly died, and they chose my sister's bad haircut over me. And now, when their own financial security is threatened by the consequences I set in motion, suddenly I am supposed to come running." Sterling pulled back to look at me, his hands on my shoulders. "You do not have to go in there." "Yes, I do. Why?" I smiled then, and I could feel how cold it was. "Because they are about to find out that the financial stress is not random bad luck. And I want to see their faces when they realize who has been holding the knife all along." Sterling studied me for a long moment, and I waited for him to try to talk me out of it, to take the high road. Instead, he kissed my forehead and said, "Then, let us go teach them what consequences look like." That is why I was marrying him. We drove the final blocks to the hospital. The trembling in my hands, replaced by a crystalline resolve. I was no longer the daughter rushing to the emergency room. I was the auditor approaching a crime scene. We walked into the hospital together, Sterling's hand solid and steady on my back. The automatic doors slid open, bringing the familiar smell of antiseptic and anxiety that all hospitals share. I knew exactly where to go. The VIP waiting room, 3rd floor. Of course they would be in the VIP section. My parents would never wait with the common people, even in a medical emergency. The elevator ride took forever, and no time at all. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I heard my mother's voice before I saw her. And she will not even answer her phone. I have called 6 times. 6. After everything we have given her, after we raised her, fed her, paid for her education. Aunt Ramona's voice cut through, tired and firm. Marcella, maybe she did not answer, because you haven't spoken to her in 18 months except two. There she is. Mom had spotted me. She came rushing down the hallway, her hair slightly disheveled, mascara smudged under her eyes. She reached for me like she was going to hug me, and I stepped smoothly to the side, letting her momentum carry her past me. Sterling moved subtly to block her from trying again. "How is Dad?" I asked, my voice professionally neutral. "Oh, now you care." Mom's manufactured grief transformed instantly into resentment. "Now you decide to show up. After abandoning your family for over a year. After humiliating us at our anniversary party. After." "Marcella. That is enough." Dad's voice came from the waiting room doorway. He looked pale but steady, standing on his own 2 feet. Not an actual heart attack then, just as I had suspected. I walked past my mother without another word and faced my father. "What did the doctors say?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Panic attack, stress induced. They want to keep me for observation overnight, but I am fine." "Good," I said. "Then I will be going." "Wet." He held up a hand. "We need to talk." "About Fallon." "About the house." There it was, the real reason for the emergency call. I looked at Aunt Ramona, who gave me a small, apologetic shrug. She had been used as bait, and she knew it. 5 minutes. I said. In private. Dad nodded and gestured to a smaller consultation room off the main waiting area. Sterling started to follow me, but I squeezed his hand. "Wait here. I will be fine." "You sure?" "I am sure." Because this was about watching them walk into the trap I had built. And I wanted to see every second of it with perfect clarity. I followed my father into the consultation room, and Mom rushed in behind us before I could close the door. Typical. The room was small, clinical, with 2 chairs and a small couch. I remained standing. "So," I said, my tone flat. "What is the crisis?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at her hands. I let the silence stretch taut. People will confess anything to fill an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mom broke. "The house," she said, her voice cracking. "Fallon's house. The carriage house. We are going to lose it." I raised an eyebrow. "How unfortunate." "Unfortunate." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "Is that all you have to say? Your sister is about to lose everything because of some technicality, some ridiculous city fines, and all you can say is unfortunate. What would you like me to say?" "That you will help." She stood up, taking a step toward me. "That despite our differences, you will still do the right thing for family." "Rylee, they are going to foreclose. Some company, called Mars Capital, bought all the debt. They sent a letter yesterday saying Fallon has 30 days to pay the full amount, or they are taking the house." I felt a thrill run through me. Not guilt, but pure satisfaction. They had received my letter. "How much does she owe?" I asked, keeping my face carefully neutral. Dad cleared his throat. "With the accumulated fines, the property taxes, and the interest this company is charging, it is approximately $348,000. That is quite a bit. It is devastating." Mom said, tears starting to flow now. Real ones this time. "We tried to pay it ourselves, but we do not have that kind of liquid cash. We would have to sell our house, and we are too old to start over. And Fallon certainly does not have it." She has been struggling, trying to find her path. Partying. I corrected calmly. She has been partying. I have seen the Instagram posts. Mom's mouth tightened. She is young, she is figuring things out, but she does not deserve to lose her home because of some bureaucratic nonsense about grass height and paint colors. The city is not charging it anymore, I said. Mars Capital is. They bought the debt, and as the new lien holder, they have every legal right to foreclose if the debt is not paid. We know that. Dad snapped, some of his old authority creeping back into his voice. That is why we need you to pay it. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Excuse me. Mom rushed forward again. Rylee, please. I know we have had our issues. I know you felt hurt by the anniversary gift situation, but surely you can see past that now. This is family. This is your sister's future. You have the money. You have always had money. You make twice what your father made at your age. A few $100,000 is nothing to you. $348,750. I said precisely. Plus ongoing interest accrual. That is not a few $100,000. That is more than most people make in 7 years. But you are not most people, Dad said, pulling out his card about patriarchal wisdom. You are a Kingsley, and Kingsleys take care of family. Your grandfather would be ashamed if he knew you were letting your sister lose the house he built. I felt nothing. Grandfather's house, I said softly. That you gave to Fallon without even asking me. That you transferred to a 29-year-old with no job, no income, and no ability to maintain it. That you handed over at a party I paid $3,000 to throw, while giving me a dirty blender. We have apologized for that, Mom said, though we all knew that was a lie. Have you? Well, we are acknowledging it now, she snapped, her fake sympathy cracking around the edges. And what do you want, Rylee? You want us to grovel, to beg? Fine. I am begging. Please help your sister. She is young and foolish, yes. But she does not deserve to be homeless. She will not be homeless. She does not live there. That is not the point. What is the point, Mom? I asked, my voice still calm, still detached. The point is that you want me to fix the consequences of your terrible decisions. Again. You gave a valuable asset to someone incompetent, and now that incompetence has come due. And instead of letting Fallon face the natural consequences of not paying her property taxes, you want me to swoop in and make it all disappear. She is your sister, Dad said, his voice hard now, all pretense of warmth gone. Family helps family. Family. I tasted the word like poison. When was the last time this family helped me? When I was in surgery alone. When I needed a down payment on my first apartment, and you said no, because you were funding Fallon's photography business that lasted 6 weeks. You never needed help, Mom said, and there was actual resentment in her voice now. Everything always came so easy to you. School, work, money. You never struggled like Fallon struggles. You do not know what it is like to be coddled. I interrupted. To be enabled. To be given everything and taught nothing. You are right. I do not know what that is like. I know what it is like to earn everything I have, while watching my sister get everything for free. Dad's face was reddening now. His stress levels were clearly rising again. This is getting us nowhere. Rylee, bottom line, will you help or not? This was it. The moment. They were expecting one of two responses: yes or a cold no. They were not prepared for option 3. I let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them deeply uncomfortable, then walked slowly to the door and opened it. "Sterling," I called out. "Could you bring the briefcase?" Sterling appeared in the doorway, carrying his leather litigation briefcase, the one he uses for court appearances. Hope flickered across Mom's face. She thought the briefcase meant a checkbook. "Thank you," I said, taking the briefcase from him. He gave my hand a quick squeeze before stepping back into the waiting room, though he left the door open. Aunt Ramona appeared behind him, curiosity clear on her face. I set the briefcase on the small table and opened it with deliberate slowness. The sound of the latch clicking open was the only sound in the sterile room. "You want my help?" I said, not looking at them, focusing on the contents of the briefcase. "You think I should just write a check for $348,750 plus interest to save Fallon from her own negligence?" "Yes," Mom breathed. "Yes, exactly. But here is what you do not understand." I pulled out the first document. "I have spent 18 months learning exactly how much damage financial irresponsibility can cause. I have watched that house, grandfather's house, deteriorate because Fallon could not be bothered to cut the grass or maintain the window frames." I laid the document on the table. It was a printout of all the municipal violations, complete with photos the city inspector had taken: the overgrown yard, the rotting window frames, the missing shutters. Dad's face went pale as he looked at the images. "I have watched her treat a $450,000 asset like a party venue," I continued, pulling out more documents. Instagram printouts, photos of beer cans on the historic porch, videos of her friends climbing on the original timber beams. "Where did you get these?" Mom whispered. "Instagram is public, Mom. Anyone can see them, including the Historic Preservation Board, who I am sure would be fascinated to see how Fallon has been treating this protected property." I pulled out the next stack: property tax records, violation notices, the escalating fines. Fallon received 17 certified letters from the city, I said. 17 warnings that she was in violation. 17 chances to correct the problems before the fines became catastrophic. She ignored all of them. She did not know. Mom started. "She did not care," I corrected. "There is a difference. And now the bill has come due." I pulled out the final document, the one I had been building to. The Mars LLC purchase agreement with the city. "This," I said, laying it carefully on top of the pile, "is the proof that someone bought Fallon's debt from the city 3 months ago. All $348,750 of it." Dad reached for the document, his hands shaking slightly. His eyes scanned the legal text, the transaction details. Then he stopped breathing. "What?" Mom demanded. "What is it?" But Dad had found it, right there in the corporate registration documents I had helpfully included. M.A.R.S. LLC, Registered Agent Sterling J. Bennett. Attorney at Law. Officers of the Corporation U. Dad looked up at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before: fear. "You bought the debt. You are M.A.R.S. Capital." Mom's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, realization, horror, and then rage. "You are foreclosing on your own sister. Her voice was shrill enough to carry into the waiting room. I am not foreclosing on anyone, I said calmly. I am simply the lien holder. Fallon can pay the debt, and the house is hers to keep. She just needs to come up with $348,750 plus the ongoing interest that accrues at 12% per annum. That is over $40,000 a year in interest alone. Dad said. Yes, that is how debt works. This is insane. Mom said, her voice rising. You are destroying your sister out of spite, over a blender. You are willing to take everything from her, because we gave you a used blender instead of a house worth $450,000. I smiled. No, Mom. This is not about the blender. The blender was just the moment I realized who you people really are. This is about consequences. Natural, legal, appropriate consequences for 18 months of negligence and entitlement. So, you are just going to take the house? Dad said flatly. I do not want the house. I want Fallon to pay her debts like an adult. She cannot. Then she will lose the house. That is how it works when you do not pay your bills. You evil, ungrateful. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. Actually, I interrupted. I am prepared to make an offer. They both froze. I reached into the briefcase one more time and pulled out a document Sterling had prepared yesterday. A settlement agreement, printed on proper legal letterhead, with signature lines and everything. I will forgive the debt entirely, I said. All $348,750. Fallon keeps the house, free and clear, and I will transfer the lien, release documents as soon as this agreement is executed. Hope blazed across both their faces. However, I continued, there are conditions. What conditions? Dad asked warily. I held up the agreement so they could see the terms clearly. First, Mom and Dad, you will pay me back the $80,000 you have borrowed from me over the years. Every emergency loan you never paid back. I have records of every transaction. That payment is due within 90 days. Mom's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Second, I went on, the conditions falling like stones. You will sell your house, your primary residence, and use the proceeds to pay me that $80,000, plus pay off your own debts. You will downsize, pay your debts, and live within your means like everyone else in the world. You cannot be serious, Dad said. I am extremely serious. You gave away a $450,000 asset to someone who could not maintain it, while asking me to fund your retirement. Those decisions have consequences. And if we refuse? Mom asked, her voice venomous. Then I foreclose on Fallon in 30 days, take the house, and sell it at auction. I will probably net around $400,000 after fees. And you will still owe me the $80,000, which I can pursue through civil court. Plus, you will have a daughter who is homeless and unemployable. Your choice. Dad was reading the agreement now. This also requires Fallon to get a job, he observed. Any job. Within 60 days, yes. She needs to demonstrate that she is capable of supporting herself like an adult. She will never agree to this, Mom said. Then she will never get to keep the house. Those are the terms. I placed the agreement on the table between us, along with a pen. You have 48 hours to decide. Sign this, execute the terms, and everyone moves forward. Refuse, and I move forward with foreclosure. Sterling will be waiting in the hallway to answer any legal questions you might have. I picked up my purse and turned toward the door. The moment of cold triumph gave way to profound sadness. This wasn't about money, it was about the death of a family. 48 hours passed in silence after I presented the settlement agreement. When the deadline arrived, my parents did not ask to meet at their house. They requested a meeting in the hospital cafeteria. Since Dad had been discharged but was waiting for final prescriptions. Neutral ground, public, safe. They were sitting at a small round table when Sterling and I arrived. Fallon was there too, wearing large sunglasses indoors and scrolling through her phone, looking profoundly bored. Mom and Dad did not look defeated, though. They looked oddly confident, the smugness I hated so much beginning to creep back into Dad's expression. Dad had a folder in front of him, not the one I gave him, but a new one. "We are glad you came," Dad said, gesturing to the empty chairs. He did not stand up. "Do you have the signed agreement?" I asked, remaining standing. "We have an agreement," Dad corrected, tapping the folder. "A counter offer. We have reviewed your terms, Rylee, and frankly, they are draconian. We are willing to pay back the $80,000 over a 5-year period. But we will not be selling our home. That is non-negotiable. And requiring Fallon to get a menial job is just vindictive." Mom nodded, crossing her arms. "We are your parents, not your tenants. You cannot just order us to sell our property. And if you try to foreclose on the carriage house, we have spoken to a lawyer friend. He says we can tie this up in probate court for years. It is a family dispute. Judges hate these things. You will spend more on legal fees than the debt is worth." They stared at me, smug and self-assured. They thought they had called my bluff. They thought the worst I could do was a tiresome, expensive civil lawsuit. They were trying to retreat back to the familiar ground of emotional leverage and legal stalling, relying on my exhaustion and deep pockets to make me give up. I looked at Sterling. He did not smile, but his eyes were dancing with anticipation. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the cafeteria chatter like a blade through silk. "There is something we need to discuss before we talk about civil court." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. I did not slam it down. I placed it gently on top of Dad's counteroffer. "Do you remember this?" I asked, looking directly at my father. "The quitclaim deed you had me sign." Mom frowned. "What does that have to do with anything? Let me refresh your memory." I flipped the deed open. Line 37. Declared property value, $25,000. That is what you put down to avoid gift tax implications. Dad waved a hand dismissively. "That is standard practice. Everyone does that. Everyone commits tax fraud." I tilted my head. "Interesting defense strategy. It is not fraud," Dad scoffed. "It is creative accounting. The IRS disagrees," I said. "You see, the problem is that the carriage house is not worth $25,000. It never was. The market appraisal, the one I had done 3 months ago, by a certified independent appraiser, values that historic property at $450,000. I let the number hang in the air. That is a $425,000 gap. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Which constitutes major tax fraud under federal law, IRS Code Section 7201. willful attempt to evade tax, carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison, and fines up to $250,000 per person. The smugness evaporated from their faces instantly. Dad's hand froze on his folder. Fallon looked up from her phone, sunglasses sliding down her nose. The silence in that moment was profound, louder than the entire chaotic party I had shut down. You wouldn't?" Mom stammered. "You threatened to tie me up in court for years," I said coldly. "You thought this was a civil dispute about a debt. It is not. This is a criminal matter waiting to happen." Sterling stepped forward, his voice low and professional, lending the gravity of his own legal credentials to my threat. "Here is the reality facing you right now. If Rylee proceeds with foreclosure, the deed becomes part of the public court record. The IRS monitors foreclosure filings for exactly this kind of discrepancy. They will audit you. They will find the fraud, and given the amount, they will prosecute. That is a fact, Royce. However," Sterling continued, "if the settlement agreement Rylee provided 2 days ago is signed unaltered, the lien is released. There is no foreclosure, no public filing. The deed remains internal." I slid my original agreement across the table, covering their pathetic counter-offer. "So," I said, "you have 2 choices. Option A, you stick to your counter-offer. I foreclose, and you explain to a federal judge why you lied about $425,000 in assets. Option B, you sign this. Right now. You sell your house, pay me back, and Fallon gets a job." Dad looked at the document, then at me. He looked older than he had 2 days ago. He realized, finally, that he was not negotiating with his daughter. He was negotiating with an auditor who had found the one error he could not hide. "You would really send us to jail," he whispered. "You would really rob me to fund her." I countered, pointing at Fallon. "Sign the papers, Dad." He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking violently now, stress, induced panic returning in full force. He signed. Then he pushed it to Mom. She was crying silently, tears ruining her smudged mascara, but she signed too. "You are a monster," Fallon hissed, finally speaking, abandoning her phone. "This is blackmail." "No, Fallon," I said, taking the signed papers. "Blackmail is illegal. This is just an audit." I checked the signatures. "Perfect. You have 90 days to list the house," I told them, putting the folder back in my bag. "And Fallon, start updating your resume. I hear Starbucks is hiring." I turned and walked out of the cafeteria without looking back. 2 months of silent execution followed the signing, leading to the final stage of the audit. I tracked everything with the obsessive precision that made me excellent at my job. The parents' realtor listing went live in week 1, open houses in week 3, multiple offers by week 5. Dad and Mom accepted a cash offer in week 7, $10,000 below asking, but they were desperate and it showed. The closing happened on a gray Tuesday morning. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a bank notification. Wire transfer received. $80,000. I stared at that number for a long moment. $80,000. Every penny I had given them over a decade. Returned in full. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the end of a chapter I had been trying to close for 18 months. A chapter that ended not with a cheer, but with a sterile, computerized transaction. But the book was not finished yet. I picked up my phone and made my second call, This one to the foreclosure processing company I had hired 6 weeks ago. The Kingsley property on Heritage Lane, I said. Proceed with eviction. Today. Fallon had exactly 0 days to be surprised. She had had 2 months to come up with the maintenance fees, 2 months to get a job, 2 months to prove she was anything other than a parasite in designer yoga pants. She had done nothing but post increasingly unhinged social media rants about toxic family members and karmic justice. Well, karma had arrived, and she was dressed in a sheriff's uniform. I drove to the carriage house one last time, Sterling next to me, parking my Audi Q5 across the street where I could watch. The sheriff's vehicle was already there, along with a moving truck I had arranged. Professional, efficient, merciless. The front door opened. I could hear Fallon before I could see her. "You cannot do this! This is my house! My sanctuary." The sheriff, a patient-looking woman in her 50s, held up the eviction notice. "Ma'am, this is a legal foreclosure. You have 10 minutes to collect personal items. Everything else stays." "No, no." Fallon's voice climbed to a shriek. "Call my sister. She cannot do this. Mom and Dad already paid her back. She got her money." I stepped out of my car and walked toward them slowly, deliberately. Fallon's eyes locked onto me, and the expression on her face was somewhere between betrayal and pure, impotent rage. "You!" She lunged forward, but the sheriff blocked her with one arm. "You evil witch! They paid you everything. Everything!" I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at my sister. The sister I had once protected from bullies in middle school. The one I had taught to ride a bike. "That money," I said calmly, pointing back across the street, "paid for your parents' past. This house pays for your laziness." "What are you even talking about?" Fallon screamed. "I needed time to build my brand. You knew that. Everyone knew that. You had 18 months, I replied. You could have gotten a job. Any job. Minimum wage at a coffee shop would have covered the maintenance fees and taxes. But you did not. You threw parties and posted pictures and lived in my house like you owned it. It was mine. They gave it to me." "No," I corrected, shaking my head slightly. "They tried to. But they never actually owned it, did they? Not free and clear. And when they could not pay the fines, the city took priority. And when I bought that debt, I took priority. You are not being evicted from your sanctuary, Fallon. You are being evicted from my collateral." The sheriff gestured to her deputy. "Ma'am, your time is up. Let us go. This is not over." Fallon shrieked as they escorted her down the steps. "I will sue you. I will ruin you. I will tell everyone what you did." "Please do," I said pleasantly. "I am sure your 73 Instagram followers will be devastated." She tried to lunge at me again, but the deputies had her now, walking her firmly toward the street where a taxi was waiting, also arranged by me. I was not completely heartless. She would not be homeless. She would just be Mom and Dad's problem in their tiny rental apartment. The thought made me smile. When the taxi pulled away, Fallon's face was pressed against the window, still screaming soundlessly. I turned to the sheriff. "Thank you for your professionalism. Just doing my job, ma'am." She handed me the keys. "Property is yours now. All legal." I climbed the steps and pushed open the door. The carriage house was exactly as I remembered it. The red brick walls still stood strong, the oak floors still gleamed, though they were scuffed now from neglect. But it was empty. Completely, utterly empty. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the rooms. The yoga studio she had created, in what used to be the library. I stopped in the center of that yoga room, and set down the box I had been carrying. The blender. I lifted it out carefully. It was the same dirty blender from 18 months ago. The residue on it had dried to a hard, odorless crust. The plastic was dull. I placed it in the exact center of the oak floor. Then I plugged it into the wall outlet. The cord reached with an inch to spare. I turned the dial to high, forcing it to consume the silent, empty room. The sound tore through the empty house like a scream, like a laugh, like a reckoning. It echoed off the brick walls, bounced across the hardwood, filled every corner of every room with its ridiculous, piercing roar. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stood there for a moment, watching it vibrate against the floor, listening to it destroy the sanctity of Fallon's precious sanctuary. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door behind me. The blender kept screaming. The eviction was the end of the debt, but not the end of the audit. Sterling was waiting by my car, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. Behind us, the old carriage house stood silent, save for the furious, mechanical whine tearing through the empty air. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Like I have one more thing to do," I said. I pulled out my phone and opened a new email. The recipient field automatically populated, tips@irs.gov. Sterling sighed, but he did not try to stop me. "Rylee, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Professional ethics won't let me ignore it." $450,000 versus $25,000. That is not a rounding error. That is deliberate fraud. I started typing, my fingers moving with practiced efficiency. We had promised to release the lien. We had promised not to sue for the $80,000. We never promised to hide a felony. They assumed my silence was part of the purchase price. They forgot that I am an auditor. I do not cover up discrepancies. I report them. I attached scanned copies of the quitclaim deed, the independent appraisal, and the property records. Everything documented, everything provable. The kind of evidence that would make a federal agent salivate. Subject: anonymous tip, property valuation fraud. I read aloud as I typed. I am writing to report a significant discrepancy in declared property value regarding the transfer of property from Royce and Marcella Kingsley to Fallon Kingsley. Sterling understood. This was no longer about getting back what I was owed. That debt was settled. This was about principle, about the cold, clean logic of accountability, which superseded family loyalty every time. I hit send. The email disappeared into the digital void, carrying with it the last connection I had to Royce and Marcella Kingsley. Let the federal government deal with them now. I was done. I felt finished, not victorious. Finished with trying, finished with caring, finished with them. I pulled the sold sign from my trunk. The realtor's sign I had requested specifically, and walked to the wrought iron gate. The architect who had bought the property from me had paid $20,000 above asking. She had been thrilled at the opportunity, and had already drawn up plans to restore it to its former glory. The carriage house would be beautiful again. Just not for Fallon. I hung the sign on the gate, making sure it was perfectly centered, perfectly visible. Then I got in my car. Sterling slid into the passenger seat. "Where to?" he asked. I started the engine. Looking at the historic red brick house, one last time. Behind those walls, a dirty blender was still screaming on an empty floor. The sound was the perfect summation of everything they had given me, everything they had taken, and everything they had never understood about who I was and what I was capable of. "Home," I said. And I drove away, leaving the past, the toxic family, and the roaring blender behind forever.